Hello, welcome to 2025, and I think this is going to be a big year for Arion Games. We've got a lot planned. There's a lot in the pipeline, most of which you all already know about, some of which you may not. So what have we got coming up in 2025? Well, we've got the Savage Worlds Fantasy Skirmish line to complete. So the setting codex is mostly written. It will need some photographs, illustrations, so there's a fair amount of painting to be done over the next month or so, but it shouldn't take too long before that is out and available for sale. And that is going to bring Savage Worlds Fantasy Skirmish into historical games, modern and near modern games, sci-fi games, etc. And it's going to talk about how do you build and balance an army list for, say, a sci-fi game. How do you deal with vehicles, things like air support, and so on and so forth. So that still has to be finished, but that's mostly done. Once that is done, then there is a final, much smaller book I want to produce to sort of round off that line. And that is basically a mercenaries type campaign. So very much like the End Times book was a combination of the RPG with the war game and how they work together to really bring the best out of the system. The mercenaries book will be setting agnostic. So what it will do is it will allow you to play, say, a sci-fi mercenary campaign, and this will either be GM'd or non-GM'd, and it will have rules for reinforcements and recruiting new troops and organising contracts and rewards and so on and so forth. So it can be used to run a fantasy mercenary campaign, a sci-fi mercenary campaign, historical, or to run a series of fantasy battles or other battles as part of a mercenary campaign. And then I also want to, as part of that, finish writing the science fiction campaign. So this is about maybe a fifth written already. And this, very much like the End Times, is going to make use of the setting codex to incorporate sci-fi battles within an RPG context, within a campaign context. So there's going to be a pre-written 20-session campaign, very much like End Times, but for sci-fi. And the characters as part of that will end up fighting in bigger battles. So that will do for sci-fi what the End Times campaign did for fantasy. So those three books over the course of this year will round out that Savage Worlds Fantasy Skirmish line. It's probably not the end of that line completely, but that will round out the main books that I want to publish for it. Now, obviously, Advanced Fighting Fantasy is the main line we have. And there are three main books that we're going to be working on. The first of those that I'm working on personally is the priest book. I was originally going to do a book of gods, which was going to be priests plus rules for sort of priests in society and temples and robes and preaching and all that sort of stuff. But actually, you know what? I want to bring all of the God information into a separate book. So the priest book is going to be rules, options, talents, abilities, powers, etc. And then there will be a later, hopefully this year, book which will have a couple of pages on every major god, which will have a whole load of extra details on religion on Titan. We're also working on a sci-fi follow-up to the Adventure Creator. Now, as I've probably mentioned before, this is not going to be just a whacking great sci-fi book with all sorts of tables for all sorts of sci-fi. What it's actually going to be is very much a focused book. So it's going to be a book on, and we haven't decided which subject yet, but it's going to be, say, traders or bounty hunters or exploration or whatever. And it's going to be a whole load of tables to allow a GM to create a campaign around that style, or indeed a solo player to create a campaign around that style. So the Bounty Hunter book, if we do that one first, I have no idea if we will, we'll have tables for generating who it is you're chasing, how long the chase ends up being, where you have to go, what complications, what do you have to deal with, etc., as part of that chase, along with the reward you get. Do you have to bring them back? Is it a neutralize, etc.? Now, the trade one will obviously have a whole lot of trading stuff and complications, and the exploration one will allow you to do Star Wars or the small ship exploration or whatever. And then also being worked on by someone else is a superhero version of AFF. And this is something that's sort of been on my radar for a long time. But someone is actually writing this now, and it's looking really good. I'm not going to say too much now until all the sort of play testing has been done and we're a bit closer, but that hopefully will be this year as well. So that is by no means all of the AFF books this year. There are going to be more, but those are the ones that are sort of top of my production list for AFF. Now, obviously, the board game, we are doing the Game Fan campaign for the miniatures part of that, starting in a couple of weeks. The board games should be shipping out to people in May or June this year. And we're really excited about that. That's going to be really, really good. And if it does well in the second campaign, in distribution sales, etc., hopefully towards the end of the year, we should be looking at putting together the first expansion, which I'm thinking might be, given my history with AFF, a forest expansion. So this will be forest tiles, forest monsters, some extra treasure cards, a couple of extra characters, etc., etc. So again, that is all coming along nicely. You know a lot about this because I've talked a lot about both of these already. And we also have some various plans afoot to bring AFF to you digitally. And what I mean by that is we obviously have the Fantasy Grounds rule set. Now, Fantasy Grounds is a little more complex to keep updated and active than we had first anticipated. And so we have various approaches that we are going to use to deal with that. Potentially alternative VTT platforms, possibly even our own product. So various things are being worked on there. But the idea behind all of these is to make it easier for you to play AFF. And when it comes down to it, that's the most important thing. So I've also been talking a fair bit about Maelstrom Prophecy. Now, that's not going to be published this year, but it is going to be worked on quite a lot this year. And I'm hoping to do a video in the next few days talking about magic on that. That is one of those that is going to keep building and building and building and building. You're going to hear a lot about it. And long before it ever reaches either crowdfunding, if we do it that way, or release, you are going to know an awful lot about that game. But again, that's really exciting how that is coming together. We do have one other AFF project in the works. Again, unlikely to be this year, almost certainly the year after. And I don't want to say too much about that. It is AFF, but it's a slightly different approach to everything else. But I'm not going to say any more, so don't ask. And then we do have potential for other books. I'd quite like to get the Sorcerer of Turok campaign complete. I've got a companion book and indeed a campaign for Crown and Dragon. A lot will depend on time. A lot will depend on maybe lining up another author to finish some of these books. So we do have an awful lot going forward. We're obviously still collaborating with Sam on the Warlock Returns, and I know there's a new issue of that due out soon. So whether you're a fan of AFF, Maelstrom, any of the other games, the board game, whatever, we have got a lot coming for you in 2025, and there is huge potential for all of this to get much, 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 much bigger. And so thank you for your support in 2024 and before. We look forward to your support in 2025, and hopefully we'll be bringing you some good games to enjoy throughout the year.